welcome. Joining us tonight in a first for Q&A, the Chinese government is represented by Deputy Head of the Chinese Embassy, Minister Wang Xining.
What would be different about this epidemic if China was a democracy?
Stan Grant.
I think you've touched on something really significant there. This epidemic takes us into uncharted waters. For China, it's a little bit of a perfect storm. China's just come off its worst GDP figures in 30 years, its latest economic growth figures. So the economy had been slowing anyway. A crisis like this reveals the fragility of the Chinese model. China is often called a fragile superpower. Something like this where China is unable to control the information flow, unable to control reactions to this in the way that it can control normal life in China, can very quickly become an existential crisis. So it reveals some of the soft underbelly of China, that an autocratic regime finds it very difficult to deal with things outside of its control. In a democracy, of course, we have checks and balances. We are able to elect our own governments, and we also critically have a free media. So people can ask questions, they can hold people to account. What's happened in China, we saw with the Wall Street Journal reporters who reported critically of China are being expelled from the country. We saw with some health officials who had raised early concerns about this being detained inside the country. So it really does raise questions about a country like China, which has an outsized influence on the world, which is by some measures already the biggest economy in the world and certainly on track to becoming outright the biggest economy in the world, does not share a political system comparable to our own with its same checks and balances.
Minister Wang, has China mishandled this crisis?
I think the system helped to handle the epidemic pretty effectively. People doubt about cover-up at the first stage, but naturally it takes time to face a challenge.
Was there a cover-up?
I don't think there is a cover-up. It is a very sophisticated issue. It involves a lot of agencies, a lot of expertise. So it takes time to make a precise judgment on how to deal with. If possible, I would like to explain. People say Australia is a Western democracy and we are a party state. Actually, we see ourselves as a socialist democracy. A simplest comparison between Australian democracy and Chinese democracy will be like this. You have a voting democracy, we have a working democracy, because efficiency is our top concern.
Democracy involves voting.
We vote.
Who votes?
People vote. People vote for the member of the National People's Congress and the People's Congress at all levels.
There's not a free vote to elect the leaders of China.
It is free. It is free. I work in the local government. I know how people are voted. Of course,
So how many votes did Xi Jinping win to become the leader of China?
Xi Jinping was voted the president, and in the party there's also a voting process. You don't know that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Let me finish. I will take 2 minutes. Working democracy, why that? Because efficiency is top concern. We are a developing country. We need the efficiency to catch up with the developed world, with economic and social progress. And you have a deliberative democracy, we have a consultative democracy. We don't want to waste too much energy in the contention about ideas. At the final stage of parliament debate, at the threshold of policy making, we involve a lot of people in an extensive process of policy debate. When I worked in Beijing, our year plan need to consult with 8 parties who participated in administration and legislation. You don't know that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And the final thing, you have a competitive democracy. We have an inclusive democracy. We don't think winner take all is a good idea for current China. We need to include everybody in the joint growth of our country. So if this policy, the minority might lose some interest, we will find another supplement way to make sure that their interests will be better protected. So it is difficult in this part of the world to understand how a democracy should work with one single leading party. It is difficult.
Let me bring in Vicky Xu. Is China a democracy, as he describes it?
I don't think. I think there are democracy is written into China's constitution, but if they are practically carried out is another issue. And just speaking of cover-up during coronavirus, I would like to give us here a timeline. So 30th December, a Chinese doctor, Li Wenliang, and he talked about the possibility of coronavirus in a private chat group with other doctors. He's a professional, he's a medical professional, so he knows what he's talking about. And he was taken away by the police, and he was forced to apologize, he was silenced. And 5 weeks after, this doctor passed away, and he was infected with coronavirus. And the 7th of January, the President Xi Jinping gave instructions to, inside of the party, to other leaders about coronavirus. But China did not declare national emergency about coronavirus until 20th of January. And that's, from the day Dr. Li Wenliang was taken away by the police to China, declared emergency. That's 3 weeks. So I'm sure a lot of public servants were working very hard to figure this out. But I do think the 3-week gap needs explanation.
Minister Wang, was it a mistake to silence Dr. Li in the beginning?
The central government already sent an investigation team to Wuhan to find out what happened with Dr. Li. But he's a very respectable and commemorable doctor, and people will remember him for what he does. He's one of thousands of doctors and nurses who dedicate their life sometimes for the sake of this epidemic.
So let me bring in Stan Grant. Was the silencing of Dr. Li a symptom of the system? That's the question, really.
It goes to the heart of the problem in the system, and that is that the system is not transparent and it does not allow the free flow of information. And under Xi Jinping, that has only doubled down. As you know, there are more activists, more dissidents, more journalists locked up in China today under Xi Jinping than there was before. Wang Xining and I go back a long way because he was in charge of me, effectively, controlling the foreign media when I was in Beijing. When we would do a story on CNN, which I was working for then, that the Chinese did not want people to watch, and Minister Wang would know this, the screen would go black. So information was blocked from people. People that we would interview would often disappear, would be put under house arrest or detained. We were detained on numerous occasions, sometimes violently and physically detained, intercepted. So the problem in the country is that it doesn't trust its own people to allow the free flow of information. Hence, something like this can very quickly become an existential crisis for a country like China. When you add to that a slowing economy, increasing unemployment, increasing levels of debt, protests in Hong Kong, you reveal the fragility that sits underneath the autocracy of China.
The suppression of information that he's describing, that's true, isn't it?
I don't agree.
Well, you do black out the screen.
We were there together, and
yes,
you know very well what
six,
happened to foreign journalists if they didn't obey your rules.
There were over 600 foreign correspondents. Some are from the West media, some are from developing countries. We think sometimes the Western media filter out the information, pick out a piece from the large jigsaw to portray China as a very autocratic country where if you go into the alleys, go into the street, talking to the people, you'll find, for example, according to Pew Center, 85% of the people agreed with what the government is doing. They think China is moving to the right direction. And there are 90 million Communist Party members. And each year there are 2 million more joining the party, 80 of them under the age of 35. If you think they are idiots, that will be insult.
But this is just a simple question. Do you suppress information by blacking out the screens when there's information you don't like?
What case you are referring to? But
Stan, I'm sure you can.
Numerous examples, and you know this. When something goes to air the Chinese officials didn't like, they would black the screen. I'm not sure about which case you refer to, but we. Okay, I'll give you an example. We did stories on Chen Guangcheng, who was a blind activist being held under house arrest by the Chinese government. When we did stories, the minute we would mention his name, the screen would go black. There's just one example.
That's a case related to Washington's involvement with the judicial process of China. And I think freedom of speech is also enshrined in our constitution, and the government is trying best to protect that on the condition it doesn't affect the social stability. And I think anywhere in the world, there's a periphery for freedom of speech. I don't think child pornography or pro-terrorist information would be allowed in Australia or anywhere in the world. So if we see the party's leadership is enshrined in the constitution, everything has to be done according to the Constitution.
Vicky?
I would like to add that in the case of Dr. Li Wenliang, following his death, this is the biggest public outcry I've seen in China's social media in the last 5 years, maybe up to a decade. Let me finish. And people are so angered and saddened by this doctor's death because, he's the perfect doctor. He's the perfect Chinese citizen. He supports Hong Kong police. He supports all the Communist Party policies.
He's a party member. He's a
party member.
Yes.
He's a perfect citizen.
Yes.
Yet, he was silenced and he died from this virus. And on social media, the trending hashtag was, I want freedom of speech. So the Chinese people think this is an act from the Chinese government party suppressing freedom of speech.
Anyone who obstructs the process of proper dealing with the crisis, with this epidemic, will be dealt with according to either party disciplines or the national law. There's no doubt about that. Several high-level cadres already lost their job because they are bad performance during this process.
No, I disagree. Wuhan mayor, on his way out, he was fired. When on his way out, he said he wanted to report this. It was a mistake. He didn't report this earlier, but he couldn't do it without central government's approval. So that delayed things. That is a problem of a centralized power.
Again, you are picking one piece out of a big jigsaw. Look at the scale the central government and government at all levels put in this national campaign, and we believe at this moment every country that have been affected should share the information, particularly the method of treatment and medicine and vaccines with every country, with the International Health Organization, so as to prevent this epidemic from further spreading. Look at how much effort the government has made. Wuhan had been locked down overnight. More than 30,000 medical staff have been dispatched to Wuhan and other cities in Hubei province to help their colleagues. And the whole population were advised to stay home. It's unprecedented challenge in human history. It's unprecedented campaign organized by the Chinese government against an epidemic, which is a common enemy of mankind. Not only what the sacrifice China has done is for the benefit of the world.
OK, let's take our next question this evening from Alexander Dayant.
Oh, well, this is a good follow-up question. So this is for Deputy Head of Mission Wang Xining. When Scott Morrison announced his decision to extend the travel ban to all non-Australian arriving from China due to the coronavirus, you said it was an overreaction. But if China has locked down more than 45 million people in Wuhan, is China not also overreacting?
So, Minister Wang, the question is, you've criticised Australia, describing something of an overreaction by barring students from coming here, for example. How can you call our reaction too much when you're taking very severe action in China? But you described Australia's reaction as a vicious cycle of panic and overreaction on February 4th.
What I said 2 weeks ago, I mean, it is easy to fall into a vicious trap of panic and overaction. So, and I also said it's up to the Australian government to decide what to do. And it's the medical authority headed by Dr. Murphy, who knows your capacity well, who knows the situation well, who knows the restraint well. We respect their recommendation, but at the same time, we have business people back in China waiting to come back to their offices in Sydney and Brisbane, blah, blah. And also, over 100,000 students are waiting, coming back to their campus. And over the past 2 days, the accumulative figure of confirmed cases in China are going down, new cases are going down, and there are 0 cases in major cities. And even in provinces surrounding Wuhan, like Henan, which has nearly 100 million people. So we think we will provide our opinion to help the Australian government to make a right decision that is scientific, rational, and proportionate to the risk.
So, given that, I want us to take a look at some of the images broadcast tonight on the ABC displaying some of the measures that have been taken in China. Let's just take a look. Are these sorts of measures appropriate, proportionate?
We need to make 100% effort to achieve 0% possibility of further outbreak, even, to prevent any possibility of human-to-human transmission. Some people are not very willing to cooperate.
But are these tactics appropriate?
You mean dragging people out? Yeah, if they are confirmed. If they are confirmed, they are the host. Think of their neighbors. And think of now, millions of people are staying home. They are also suffering because I know some people are quite stir-crazy, and the youngsters are talking on the social media. They miss hot pot, they miss barbecue and beer. They're talking about the possibility of next round get together. But this is, most of the Chinese people are good people. They're willing to sacrifice their immediate pleasure and personal income for the greater good. If we let these people out, and there are several cases recently of not communal outbreak, but people-to-people transmission. Those people who were infected, what would you say to that? We don't use force to put them into custody and give them proper treatment and stop further outbreak.
Let's take a video question next, and this comes from two gentlemen in Adelaide. Their names are Saddam Abdul Salam and Almas Nizamuddin. You may have seen them in a documentary about the Uyghur community in Australia last year.
Hello, my name is Saddam and this is my friend Almas. And we are both Uyghur Australians. And our question is for Mr. Shining. Almas's wife is detained in the Communist Party prison without any evidence. He hasn't heard from her in 3 years. And my wife and my 3-year-old son are under house arrest in Xinjiang. My son is an Australian citizen with holding an Australian passport, and I have never met him. The Australian government have given my wife a visa so that they can come and join me in Australia. But the Chinese government won't let them leave. Why has the Communist Party locked up 1 million Uyghurs? Will you release our family members?
Let's keep this very simple. Why can't he see his son?
This is another piece out of a big jigsaw. The Xinjiang Autonomous Region has a land equivalent to Queensland and has the population of the entire Australia. Uyghur constitute about 2/5 of the entire population. There are 55 other other ethnic groups. And ever since 1990s, when there are strong growth of radicalism and terrorism in Xinjiang, the Chinese government made huge effort to secure safety for the people because thousands of people have been killed. But ever since 2016...
With respect, that's not answering the question. It's simple. Why can't that man see his son? His son
according
is
to my knowledge, it's Mr. Abdul Salam.
Yes.
Yeah, he's not a Uyghur, he's a Uzbek. He took his wife, the lady in Xinjiang, to the United States for a romance tour, and the lady became pregnant. It's understandable. But according to Chinese law, they don't have legal matrimonial relations. And according to what the regional government
does the child have Australian citizenship?
We don't recognize dual citizenship, so you are either Chinese citizen or Australian citizen. But the girl with the son, with the family, told the government in Xinjiang she would not like to come to Australia. This is the story, this is the information provided by the regional government. Again, let me finish. I think epidemic is a common enemy, but infodemic is much more serious an enemy.
Well, if infodemic is the problem, why don't you let journalists go into Xinjiang? Why don't you let us go in and see these children?
Yeah, what?
I would happily travel there and interview.
The journalists are going to Xinjiang.
Would you allow me to go and travel there?
Without minders, without people following him?
Nobody will follow Hamish over there.
So you would allow me to go with a team from the ABC to report from Xinjiang to see the camps?
No, when Stan worked with CNN, I think your team went to Xinjiang for a couple of times. And people are talking about the training center.
We were often detained.
In this
we
part
were
of the
often physically assaulted while trying to get to speak to people in many parts of China. As well you know, Wong, from our time together.
Again. It's always taking a piece out of jigsaw and portray China as something very bad.
With respect, I mean, there are a lot of pieces in this jigsaw that paint a very particular picture when it comes to information.
Yes.
I mean, you're saying that it's wrong to identify small pieces of the jigsaw, but this is important. This is a family. The child is an Australian citizen. Why won't you let him travel here?
My government wouldn't recognize his citizenship because his mother, his blood mother, is the custodian, right? She is responsible for defining the citizenship of the boy. She didn't apply to the regional government or to the Chinese government for another citizenship. This is what the embassy is informed by the regional government. There's always one-sided story purported by the Western media. That's why Western media is not welcome in China.
Are you seriously saying, though, that this woman and the child don't want to come to Australia?
I mean that.
Four Corners has reported on this case and with videos of this woman saying she wants to come to Australia. Are you saying that ABC faked these videos of this woman crying?
There's a lot of fake news running around.
You're accusing ABC of fake news right now, and you're on their show. Do you understand the irony?
Yesterday, on the Chinese social media, the popular item is a map used by one of the Western media portraying the 5 million people running around the world, sending coronavirus around.
No, let's come back to Xinjiang, please.
That's a picture that's used 10 years ago. I mean, this is, I hope this is a qualified journalism, not a purpose to boost the Western superiority over China. China is such a big country with so much sophisticated issues. The government and the party have done so much. Look at what happened over the past 4 decades. Australia still accounts for 25%, China, trade with China accounts for 25% of the total of Australia. And China has put forward the Belt and Road Initiative to share economic opportunity with everybody in Asia-Pacific community. And we learn to share our resources with every citizen because we can't afford to have the same per capita resources consumption as the West. You over-consume, you don't know it. So there's a legitimacy of argument back in China. So I said, try to understand the Chinese perspective.
I have a Chinese perspective.
Yes.
I'm from China. Yes. I lived most of my life in China.
Yes.
I'm a Chinese person. I speak Mandarin as well as you do.
Yes.
And I just want to go back to that question of those 2 men asking for their wives.
I already explained the case. I already offer you the information from
your perspective.
From our regional government. So it's up to the whole Australian audience to judge about this particular case. But on the issue of Xinjiang, since I came to Canberra, I find it's a small number of people in Australia who tried all out to preach xenophobia and give a misportrayal of China. I think they are either out of their politically motivated, out of their selfish personal aspiration, or they are nudged and supported by some foreign forces, as you could seek evidence in recent today's United States.
Foreign Minister Marise Payne has personally raised the case about the Uyghurs. She says she's very concerned about 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities being detained. And she has requested the Chinese government to give the information about the whereabouts of Saddam Abdul Salam's wife and child's whereabouts multiple times. Are you saying that our Foreign Minister Marise Payne is
Madam Payne
somehow
was
a
misinformed.
stooge of the United States.
Madam Payne was misinformed.
Are you saying she listens to fake news?
Sometimes on the Western media's portrayal about the issue. It's training center. People get to be prepared for future jobs.
Training centers with fences and barbed wires and watchtowers and guards. And people are rounded up and sent in.
There are over 1,000 people who visited these training centers. Most of them, many of them are from Muslim countries. And
those are guided tours with minders.
Can I just interrupt here? Are people in these camps, and you call them re-education camps?
No, they are not camps, they're training centers.
Training centres. Are they there voluntarily?
I think most of the trainees committed minor offences, not to the degree of criminal persecution. Yeah, that's a word.
But are they there voluntarily?
Some of them, many of them, I would say. Because that region was contaminated by terrorist and radical ideas, thousands of people were killed before 2016. If you blame the training center for holding these people, give them modern secular education, what would you say to the victims of those people killed? In Yunnan, a 16-year-old girl smashed people with knives and kill a lot of some people and say, I believe because I'm told by the terrorists, this is the way I will bring my victim to the heaven.
And
so the first priority is to, there are 10 million Uyghur. Where have you got the number 1 million?
This is a number confirmed by the UN. This is a number confirmed, recognized by the Australian government.
We have United Nations officials visiting the training center and come to a different judgment and conclusion. You people laughed at my explanation because you were immersed with messages and information provided by the Western media. You were not even reading the Muslim media. In the UN Human Rights Council, Australia joined the other 22 countries who wrote a letter to the High Commissioner blaming China for the Xinjiang policy that represents 600 million people. But there are more than 30 countries who supported China, writing the same letter to the High Commissioner. They represent 3 billion people.
Let me interrupt because we do need to wrap this up. Jason, you talked earlier about good China, bad China, and that Australia has this challenge in dealing with both. A final thought.
On this particular issue, this is clearly bad China. I think we know what's going on here, and I think we need to call it out in the strongest possible terms. What we need to ask, however, it's great to talk about it here in Q&A, watching the fireworks, it's all good. But how do we make a real difference on this issue as Australians? And I think there's 2 ways that we can do this. The first is we need to be able to talk to the Chinese leadership at the highest level in an environment of trust so that our opinions are respected. So that relationship that we have with China is critically important. And I think that relationship right now has seen better days. So we need to improve that, number 1. Number 2 is, to the good China, we need to find those areas where we can collaborate with China positively to do something about these issues. And I know that there was a time when our government ran human rights programs together with the Chinese government on this issue of domestic violence. Now, this is a really topical issue in Australia right now, and I imagine it's a topical issue in China. So how do we find those areas where our interests overlap, which aren't quite as heated as they are now, and build on the good stuff? Because I suspect if we double down on good China, it allows us to have the trust, the relationships, to have the really hard, robust discussions about bad China.
Can I just say something really quickly about that, though? The world's been waiting for that to happen for a very long time, Jason. The idea always was that as China becomes more wealthy, they'll become like us, that they will liberalise. Under Xi Jinping, we've all seen them doubling down on authoritarianism. So we can't just expect that China will become more like us if we find ways to cooperate and communicate. We're doing that, and we're seeing Xi Jinping reject outright ideas of liberalism and democracy.
But
why should China be like another Australia? It's had 1.4 billion people while you have 25 million people, while you, the per capita...
I think if we've learned one thing this evening, it's that we need to do another discussion about this. We do hope that you will come back.
I'll be very happy to do that. I think the sensible voice is too stifled here. I hope I will have another opportunity to have an in-depth discussion about whatever issue you are concerned with.
We look forward to having you back. That's all we have time for tonight.